Hello everybody, I'm Rusty Tweed, and this is the fourth of a four-part series of webinars we're doing dealing with the coronavirus and its effects on real estate. In the first one we talked about what's happened with interest rates and cap rates because of the virus. In the second one we talked about a bunch of new tax incentives that came out. The third one we talked about the market in Texas. And today we're going to be focusing on triple net lease properties, how they're very low risk in this type of market, and also how to lower your risk by having a diversified portfolio. So again, obviously we're in the middle of this. It's a horrible situation. Nobody likes it. It's very uncomfortable. We're under lockdown, etc. And so we're just going to have to deal with it. There's two major risks that we have to look at in this kind of situation. The first one is pretty obvious. It's the health risk. So I think everybody's pretty aware of that by now. If you're not, I don't know what to say, but the reality is that there's a big health risk out there. You have to follow your protocols. You have to have your social distancing. You have to wash your hands. That's all over the news and it's over everywhere you go. So I'm not going to go into that. I think we're all very, very aware of it. And also I feel very bad for the people that are having negative issues right now with their health. And let's hope they can get through it. And a lot of them are. But again, let's just hope and pray they get through that and we get through all this as well. The second risk that we have to look at are the economic risks. And so again, with all these things that are happening, we went from one of the most booming economies in our lifetimes. I mean, it was just on a roar January and February. And then bang, it came to a grinding halt real quick. And literally within 2 weeks, we dropped down to one of the highest unemployment spikes we've seen maybe in history. So this is a big deal. It's very, very disruptive. A lot of things are changing and we'll see how this plays out. Okay, so when you talk about these economic risks, pretty obvious. In any major disruptive environment like this, there's going to be winners and there's going to be losers. And unfortunately, in this situation, I think there's going to be a lot more losers than winners. And we need to really take a good look at that, be aware of it, and going forward as investors, there are going to be some great advantages to take of this. Unfortunately, it's a bad scenario to be in this in the first place, but if we're going to be in it, we're going to have to be real smart and do the right thing. Now, we pulled this off the CDC's website, and all we're showing you here is, we're doing all these lockdowns and home or shelter and home programs. By doing that, you hear this term flattening the curve. So what they're saying is, if we did nothing, you'd see this great big spike, right? And then a drop off, which would be quicker than if you flatten the curve. So by putting in all these measures, the spread of the virus is slowed down, and rather than the hospitals being totally overwhelmed with this massive amount of cases at one time, which they're having anyway, it would slow that down and the hospitals will be able to deal with it more effectively. In the end though, by having these shelter and home programs and lockdowns, it's lengthening the time period that we're going to go through this. And so it will save lives and it'll actually make things better for the hospitals, et cetera, and for the people going in them. But as an economic scenario, it's going to lengthen the problems that we're having economically with businesses having to shut down. And that's very unfortunate. So how will this pandemic play out? Well, first of all, we're right in the beginning of the cycle. And so it's really, really hard for us to give you an accurate prediction. There's a lot of different plays out there. But I think the bottom line is that the longer we have these lockdowns and the longer we have all these shelter and home programs, et cetera, the tougher it is to come back out of it. Now, again, I've seen a lot of different reports. Some are talking about what they call a V curve, where things go down, right? We have a big disruption in the economy, which we have, but then we come right back out of it. And maybe that happens in 3 months, I don't know. I personally don't believe we're just going to shoot out of it. I think that with what's going on, it's going to be longer and it's going to be slower coming out. And the reason is there's a lot of disruption with a lot of businesses that I don't think a lot of people have thought through. For example, let's look at the sports world. When Dodger Stadium opens up again, how many people are going to be excited to run in there shoulder to shoulder with all the other people going to the stadium? And how many people are going to be excited to sit down in a bunch of seats where you're literally bumping into the guy beside you? I love concerts. I love going to concerts. I go to the Hollywood Bowl, I go to the Greek Theater, etc. And as you know, when you're going in for a concert, again, there's a funnel of people going through the entrance and you're all bumping into each other. And then when you're sitting down, you're again right beside everybody else, both behind you, in front of you, etc. The fabric of our society is going to change. Again, at some point we'll get through this and people will hopefully be healthy and we don't have to worry about sitting beside somebody. But let's face it, for the next, I don't know, next year, 2 years, I don't know. Some of these industries are going to have a big problem getting people to come in and be part of the show. Again, everything's going to be different, but let's face reality. Any type of activity where people are going to be clustered together is going to have issues for quite a while. Going in an airplane, you don't want to sit there in an airplane and have people sitting right beside you, same thing. Movie theaters. Also things like dentists. How excited are you to go to your dentist after all this? Because the guy that was just ahead of you might have had the virus and it spread around in there. And same with a lot of types of like chiropractic clinics, all that kind of stuff. So we may take quite a while for people to adjust, for correct protocols to go in place for these situations, and people start feeling comfortable, and it's actually appropriate for people to go back in those situations. So we don't know how that's going to play out. So again, it's really too early, but I think we can safely say that there are going to be some industries and some situations that are going to take quite a while. This is not a few month cycle. So, as an investor, or as any prudent person should, plan for the worst, but hope for the best. Because I think this will change a lot of, like I said, protocols and things that we do. Our fabric of our society is going to change dramatically going forward. And so at some point, all these correct protocols and things will go into place, and then people will actually be, it'll be a safe environment for people to go out again, and eventually this virus will burn itself out. Again, it's, the jury's out right now on how long that's going to take. Okay, so as an investor, we have to mitigate the economic risk. How do we do that? Well, as an investor in real estate, we want to focus on low-risk tenants because, again, if you're a landlord, it's all about the cash flow. You got to have a tenant that can pay his or her rent or its rent if it's a company. And so the portfolios and the investments we've been doing with our clients as far as buying property for them, we feel very comfortable with because I was worried about a recession for quite a while now. It had nothing to do with COVID-19. If you watched the first seminar we did, we've been preparing for a recession all along. It was inevitable to have a recession at some point. It might not have happened for another year or two, and it got pushed up because of this pandemic, but it was going to happen. Unfortunately, this is far worse, and it was totally unexpected than what anyone thought. But again, we were way, way overdue historically to have some kind of recession. So it's really important to have your capital placed in something that's going to mitigate the risks in this kind of environment. Okay, so let's talk about commercial real estate and what's happening here. I'm going to start with retail, and let's face it, retail, a lot of it was on the ropes before we ever heard of COVID-19. For years now, we've been hearing about all the different problems with retailers. There's been a lot of disruption because of the internet and changes in people's buying habits, etc. And so again, there was a lot of retailers that were in trouble already. Unfortunately, this whole situation is now thrust upon us from Wuhan, China, and it's not just here in America, it's all over the world, and it's caused a major, major disruption for retailers. Now, again, you're going to have to look at it case by case. For example, we know that in the restaurant business, we can take Cheesecake Factory, that's what I'm thinking of. And they basically just said, that's it, we're not paying our rent across the boards. They've shut down. So sit-down restaurants are in big trouble. And so I don't want to be a landlord for that kind of property. On the other hand, there's a lot of restaurants that are actually doing quite well. There's a seafood restaurant just down the street from us, literally walking distance, and we buy stuff there all the time. And they switched over, they have very high quality food, and there's people in and out all day long buying takeout. And so they're actually doing a very brisk business despite this. So again, every retailer is going to be different how they're treated by this disaster and how they're dealing with it personally. Some will be, like I said earlier, there's going to be winners and losers. And so hopefully we deal with the winners and not the losers. And also another example too is, let's just take Best Buy. Okay, they sell electronics, TVs, stereos, all that kind of stuff. They have a very, very strong internet presence in addition to the bricks and mortar stores. So in that case, you may not go to the store. Right now, I actually went to Best Buy yesterday, and they're not letting anybody in the store. But they had a big lineup there for people that were ordering things online and picking them up. So they're smart. Best Buy's probably going to do totally fine. You take a gym, right? You got all these CrossFit gyms and everything else. I got a feeling they're going to be in trouble, because who's going to go on in the gym and get all sweaty and everything else, thinking that the guy ahead of you is sweaty, and you're, you might pick up something from him. So there's a lot of scenarios where it's going to take a long time. I wouldn't want to be a landlord for dentists right now. Dentists are going to have a problem, because again, who wants to go in and get dental work done knowing that there could have been somebody ahead of you that had the virus? Again, protocols and things would go in place, and this stuff would work itself out, but it's going to take some time, and it's going to take a lot of time for people to get comfortable. So again, it's a case-by-case situation, but a lot of retail is going to have issues. The ones that have a good internet presence and are able to do things online and people order stuff are probably doing more business today than they normally are because of what's happening. So when you talk about office, well, the jury's a little bit out on that. I think office is probably going to do okay. I know that WeWork is probably going to be totally wiped out in this. They were already in trouble already. And that WeWork environment where everybody's working together in the same office and stuff probably isn't going to work very well down the road. Again, they will eventually adopt protocols and stuff that it will make it workable, but I think they're going to have some big issues in the meantime. But a lot of offices, I think what's going to happen is with people working from home, they will just adopt policies where there's more time at home. But big companies and stuff have to have offices. Offices are not going to go away. They're just going to have to adapt to the current environment. So I don't think we're going to see a crash and burn in the office market. Industrial is probably going to be the big winner here, believe it or not. As you know, a lot of manufacturing is going to be forced to come back to America from China and overseas. And with what I'm seeing, again, this is my opinion, what I'm seeing is that there's going to be a huge demand for companies to bring things home, because having things outsourced like this has proven to be unworkable. Something like 85% of all drugs and antibiotics, etc., are produced in China, and that's turned out to be a big problem. There's actually shortages happening right now, problem with masks, etc. All that stuff, or at least a good part of it, I think will end up coming home, and that's good for industrial, because that's manufacturers. As well, anything to do with logistics, anything to do with distributions, fulfillment centers, they're actually more busy today than they were before. And how many people today are ordering far more things from the internet through Amazon or whatever else you're using than you were 6 months ago? That activity has jumped. And so that's industrial. Any kind of warehouse space, anything along those lines is actually holding up very well and actually doing better than normal. Multifamily, the jury's kind of out on that one. We'll see how this plays out. There's a lot of programs that are going into place where tenants should be able to pay their rent. And so that shouldn't be a big problem on the short term. So the next 2 or 3 months, these programs, there's unemployment, there's makeup for, there's what they call the payroll protection program. So the employers, if they get that, they can actually afford to continue to pay their rents, or not their rents, but their payroll for several months. Actually, rent is included in that package as well. And so those programs, hopefully they go through fairly quick. They just started, so we're not sure how this is going to work itself out. But if everything goes the way it's supposed to, I don't see a big problem in multifamily. Now, if this thing drags out more than, say, 3 months, then we're going to start seeing problems, because then people have been out of work, they're going to run out of some of these benefits that they've applied for, and then it's going to be a problem for them to pay their rent. So I'm not quite sure how that's going to play out. So again, the biggest unknown here is the length of time. If it's short, 2 or 3 months, I think we'll be fine. Anything over that, I don't know. We'll see what happens. Medical, obviously medical is going to do fine. They're adapting to this. Now there's what they call telemedicine. And so a lot of doctors now are taking appointments and doing FaceTime or some other Zoom or whatever, where they can actually do an appointment with the client when the client can stay at home. And everybody has smartphones and cameras in their computers and stuff, so they can deal with that. But the doctor still needs to be in his office, and the doctor's still going to need his staff and have all his records and equipment and stuff available. And so if anything, medical is going to grow. And with all the money being pounded into the medical profession right now because of this, that's going to keep going. like I said, the one thing that I'm concerned about are some of these, like dentists and some other practices where it may take quite a while for people to feel comfortable and it's safe for them to go back to those. So again, we'll see how that plays out, but the vast majority of medical, it's going to be totally fine. When we talk about, for example, student housing, I'd be a little concerned there. I think suddenly everybody switched over from people being on campus and going to classrooms to online courses. So a lot of these kids have actually gone back to their hometown and they're doing all their courses online. That's now forced in place. Now going forward, that may stay in place. There may be a lot of students out there go, you know what, why should I spend all that extra money going to some other city and renting a room and paying all this stuff when I can just do this at home? I'm not sure how that's going to play itself, but I'm sure that a lot of these colleges are going to have some drop-off because of that and adopt new policies because of that as well. So student housing and that I'd be a little concerned about right now. Again, you just have to kind of take a look at the type of tenants you have. Again, there's going to be some winners in this economy and there's going to be some losers. The quicker we get through it, the fewer losers there are. Okay, so now we're going to talk about triple net lease properties. And why we're talking about them is, out of all the categories of real estate out there, if you're in the right property with the right tenant, it's your lowest risk bet in this environment, in any environment actually. And so for this, I'm going to have Edward Wang. He's kind of my right-hand man, and he's actually our in-house expert in triple net lease properties. He's done quite a few of them and done a lot of work in learning how to analyze them, etc. So I'm going to turn this part over to Edward.
Thank you, Rusty. So what is a triple net lease property? Rusty just mentioned a variety of different types of commercial property. And within each of these types of properties, the tenant is required to sign a lease with the landlord. So triple net lease has often been regarded as one of the most conservative and safest way of investing in commercial real estate. And so we're going to define what a triple net lease is today. Triple net lease, in short, can be defined as net of property taxes, net of building insurance or any property insurance attached to the building, and finally net of maintenance, in addition to the tenant paying their typical rent payments and utilities. And so, in short, while you might be sacrificing some cap rate percentage points on your investment, you will get more of a stable and long-term return by investing in a triple net lease building, because the tenant's going to be taking care of your typical day-to-day expenses. Now, why are we doing triple net lease buildings? Well, there's a variety of reasons. First and foremost, the tenant is required to pay your expenses. So as we mentioned earlier, instead of getting a tax bill every year or getting insurance bills or maintenance payments that are coming directly out of your own pocket, the tenant will take care of it. You just send them your property tax bill, and the tenant is legally bound to pay the property taxes, the insurance payments, and all of their maintenance expenses as well. I'm a second generation property owner, and my parents bought apartment buildings starting from the early 80s. And I can't tell you enough, countless stories of tenants calling in the middle of the night, having some issues with their maintenance, with their plumbing or the laundry machines not working. And so as multifamily owners, which I know a lot of you guys are, forget dealing with these calls, these late night maintenance calls, and having to service your tenants. In a triple net lease, the tenant will take care of all of their own expenses. Second, triple net leases tend to be steady income and lower risk. Due to the fact that these tenants are often national tenants or regional tenants and have some sort of credit rating, their business can easily afford to pay the rents. You don't have to deal with lower quality tenants or evicting these types of tenants necessarily as much per se. In a triple net lease, these tenants often sign 10 to 20-year terms, in which we like because of the fact that you don't have to, again, deal with vacancy rates as often or having to vet different types of tenants and sign new leases every 1 to 3 years. Because the tenants are taking care of their own maintenance expenses, it's also relatively no maintenance and little management responsibility. And we like high quality credit tenants that are established or have multiple locations versus tenants that only have 1 or 2 locations. This doesn't only show that they have better credit, but they can afford to pay their rents much easier. And also, one common question is, how do we deal with inflation as time progresses with these commercial tenants? Well, the good news is that most commercial triple net lease properties have built-in rent escalations so that it can address inflation, and also you can build equity this way if you hold it over a period of time. So what does this mean for commercial tenants, though, based on this current coronavirus pandemic? A lot of our owners, property owners, have been contacting us and asking us how we can deal with certain circumstances amidst COVID-19. Some of the issues include, number one, my tenants can't afford to pay my rent anymore. Another issue is my tenants are demanding some sort of rent abatement or even deferral, one or the other, and I don't know how to address the situation. Number three, tenants are explicitly saying that they have to lay off or furlough their employees due to COVID-19. They're dealing with some sort of financial hardship, and so they cannot pay their rents. This applies especially to retail types of tenants such as nail salons or hairstylists, in which their businesses have been completely shut down and they have no revenues in order to pay these rents. And with some types of businesses like these that are non-solvent or may have little to no reserves, a lot of them unfortunately are forced to shut down their business. Finally, a lot of the tenants are requesting some sort of rent discount during this pandemic. And all of these are legitimate concerns from the tenant. Obviously, we never would wish any unfortunate news or negative impact to these types of tenants, but the reality is the landlords have to deal with these issues. And so we've come up with a few tips as to how we can deal with these types of tenants and how we can help them kind of ride through this downturn, this period of downturn. So the big question is, what should landlords do? These aren't properties that we've sold, but these are what landlords are asking us based on the properties that they have in their portfolios. And so we've come up with a list of solutions to temporarily weather out this storm. Our first piece of advice to landlords is to keep the conversation positive and work towards viable solutions with your tenants. Our second option is provide them information with SBA loans or these government subsidized programs in which the tenant can take advantage of in order to sustain their business. There's literally $3 trillion out there for these businesses, and giving them the links or the applications to help them get started could prove to be beneficial in the long run. And so make sure that they have that information out there. Another solution is, we understand that the next few months may be an especially critical and hard time for these businesses. And so I've seen certain landlords give months of rent. I've seen certain landlords give months of deferment, but these rental payments that are deferred, whether it's 1 to 3 months, have to be amortized over the remaining lease term. So in the end, you'll still get the income that the tenant has promised to pay and are legally bound to pay, but by helping them defer these payments, you could give them a helping hand through these next months. I've also seen landlords give rent discounts anywhere between 10 to 50%. If you're very generous, you could probably give them 100%. We don't encourage that because some landlords obviously have their mortgage payments and they still have to pay for their main expenses such as plumbing, electricity, and whatnot. So 10 to 50% seems to be reasonable at this time. Also, these businesses have not heard back from the results of their SBA loans and programs. So before you make any rash decisions, it's best to wait for these results to come back, and then you and your tenant can work together proactively to come up with a solution that works best for you. And at the end, be open to negotiate. Don't be egregious. Again, everyone has their own hardships that they're dealing with. Everyone's trying to blunt the trauma from COVID-19. And so if you keep the conversation open, in the end, maintaining your tenant is much more favorable than having to evict them and find a new tenant, especially where we are right now in the economy. And unfortunately, some tenants are taking advantage of the current situation. For instance, one of my clients that bought the Pizza Hut received a letter from his tenant, which happens to own over 200 stores across the country. And they received a letter basically saying that, hey, I'm sorry, I can't pay the rent for the next 90 days. Well, we wanted to fact check and make sure that that was really the case, because we were hearing in the news that Domino's had a shortage of employees and we're looking for more employees during COVID-19. And so Pizza Hut, which is in the same industry as Domino's, shouldn't really endure some of the same hardships as other restaurants, such as the dine-in restaurants like Cheesecake Factory. And so we called the Pizza Hut and we were just curious and asking them about their sales. And believe it or not, their sales have actually increased during this time. And so when we reevaluated the letter and what they were asking for, it didn't make any sense. So verify the necessity of the rent deferral and the abatement for the tenants before you even come to an agreement with the tenant. Also, some final thoughts. Be proactive with the tenants. Don't wait for them to make a decision. You are the landlord. Taking control of the business. Taking control of your business is the best bet here. And as far as multifamily is concerned, there are HUD programs, Section 8 programs, FEMA programs, and obviously the unemployment benefits out there. So make sure that your tenants are aware of those so that they can continue to pay you your rents. Each property is definitely a case-by-case basis. When people make generalizations of the market, such as retail is impacted by 25%, that's obviously not the case with the Pizza Hut that we had, and that's a retail building, and some of the other properties that we're going to show you later on. And as Rusty implied, it is too early to be making any rash decisions. Not only can you not evict your tenant right now, but it's best to wait and see how this plays out in the upcoming days. So now we're going to dive into some of the actual transactions we've done in recent years and how these properties have responded to the COVID-19 outbreak. And I'm going to have Rusty talk on a few properties that we've transacted.
Yeah, thanks, Edward. So again, every property is going to be different. Every tenant's going to be different how this is affecting them. What you're looking at here is a triple net lease property that we did just over a year ago. We had a client that owned an apartment building right here in Glendale. He wanted to go into a property that was virtually low risk and no maintenance. And we actually knew the developer who built this. So we actually got this property 100% off market. There was no other bidders for it or anything. We met the price points the developer wanted, and worked out great, actually. So again, this was in Plano, Texas. This is actually the heart of where a lot of companies are moving from California. This is where the Toyota moved to. A lot of big companies are right in this whole region of Plano. It's probably one of the top areas for growth right now for companies migrating into Texas. So this property was brand spanking new. Our client literally closed on the first day of the 15-year lease. It was a 6.2% cap rate. And what happened here was you're looking at DECRA. Now, DECRA is a very, very strong tenant, as strong as you could possibly. They're actually a multinational, multi-billion-dollar company out of Germany. The building here is actually designed for inspections in cars. So in Texas, you have to go to the DMV every year and get a safety check done. So this is sort of like a Jiffy Lube. There's bays around it. You drive in, they lift your car up, they look underneath the body and look for things like your brakes and your fluid levels, all kind of stuff. And so in this kind of environment, when you're doing something the government is mandating, it's going to happen. We're not going to have any problem with income here. And even if we did have a problem with income, DECRA is on the hook with the corporate office for a 15-year lease, and they're a very, very large company that will have no problem making their payments on that. Here's a property that we did last year, and what you're looking at here is an industrial building. It's actually 4 buildings in a complex, and the seller here was actually owned the whole facility and did the manufacturing. So it was a sell leaseback, we call it. All these vehicles you're seeing here are actually ambulances. Now, I flew out there and met with the owner, had lunch with him, and asked him point blank, when we had the last recession, which wasn't that long ago, what happened to your business? And he looked me in the eye and said, you know what? Nothing. There was absolutely no change in sales from before the crash back in 2008 and afterwards. He had the same sales. So the reason is obvious why. You're dealing with a necessity here, ambulances. Now, going through what we're going through now, do you think we're going to have a drop in sales of ambulances? I don't think so. And not only is he the second largest manufacturer of ambulances here in America, he actually sells a lot of ambulances to Israel and some other countries as well. So this tenant we're not worried about. You can see you got it at an 8.8% cap rate, brand new 12-year lease. Again, this is a property that we're not worried about. We've had not one word from the tenant so far, and we don't expect there to be. Going back here, this is a triple net lease property that we just did a few months back in Dallas. Again, we love Texas. We've done many, many properties there. This was right outside of Love Field. And Dollar General, I'm sure most of you have heard of them. They're kind of a low cost, it's kind of like a mini Walmart. Wherever there's not a Walmart in the area, you usually find a Dollar General. So they're much smaller, obviously, and they're all over. But they're a very, very strong tenant. People have to go buy necessities. They actually sell food as well as, 99-cent stuff. This one, brand new 20-year triple net lease, 5.8% cap rate. And so the client here actually sold a property in Florida, and the client lives here. But they sold the property in Florida, and we did a 1031 exchange to this. Right now, I'm sure our client's very happy with what's going on because we don't have to worry about those rents at all. This one, I'm going to have Edward come up and talk because this was a property that he just did.
Thank you, Rusty. As Rusty mentioned earlier, we were already anticipating some sort of correction and recession, and obviously we did not anticipate COVID-19 being the catalyst of this recession, but we were projecting that it was going to happen sooner than later. And so in this next series of properties, you're going to find that we don't deviate from our strategy of finding recession-resistant tenants. And this is a great example as to why. Having a few buddies in the restaurant industry, I started to notice that there was a shift in how restaurants were being operated. Quick service restaurants, especially ones that have drive-thrus, tend to perform very well because they can hit their revenues much quicker than dining restaurants. There's just a lot less expenses and overhead. And so we made it a point to identify these types of properties in particular because we knew that even during recessions, fast food chains tend to perform well, and especially those with drive-through components. So this example, we were able to purchase an In-N-Out building for our client. Just to give you a little background information on our client, this was a mother who wanted to buy a legacy trophy asset for her two daughters. And so we were able to source this deal directly from the developer before it hit the market. So as a result, we wanted to pursue quick service restaurants that had a drive-through component for that very reason, as they are a great hedge against recessions. In this particular transaction, my client wanted to purchase a legacy trophy asset that she would pass along eventually to her two daughters. We were able to secure this In-N-Out building at $8 million at a 4.2% cap rate, and it had a 20-year triple net lease, and we bought it directly from the developer. Because of my buyer's strong position, we were also able to secure the property at $300,000 below asking price. Now, you guys might think this $8 million is a quite sizable amount, but believe it or not, it was sourced directly from the stock market. My client liquidated her stock portfolio to go into a triple net lease building just a few months ago, back in December. And boy, is she a happy camper. We actually went to the In-N-Out building that was located a few blocks away from our offices to check on their sales. And as you can see in this picture, not only is there a line for cars waiting to get their In-N-Out burgers, but this line extends around the corner down the block. So what's going to happen to In-N-Out in this time? Absolutely nothing. They're still maintaining their sales, and paying rents would be no problem. In this other example, very similar situation. My client was coming out of a 1031 exchange. He had sold a building that he inherited from his father. It was an old retail building out in Los Angeles. And what he did was he used the 1031 exchange to buy an out-of-state triple net lease property, this time in Colorado Springs. Colorado Springs is the fastest growing city in America for millennials. And as you can see in the picture, it's located on one of the main retail thoroughfares of Colorado Springs. Neighboring tenants include Starbucks, Walgreens, Safeway, and so you get the gist of it. It's located in the core retail market in Colorado Springs, and he was able to purchase it for $1.1 million at a 6% cap rate. in a market that traditionally trades at about 5% cap rate. So client's very happy with it, and they have no problem also paying their rents. Now we're going to dive into some of the portfolios that we've done for our investors in recent years, and I'm going to give you various examples and why these portfolios will be performing well even during this COVID-19 outbreak. The first case scenario is a client that sold his Koreatown building. It was subject to rent control. It was barely activating his capital to produce half decent cash flows. And so the first property we bought with the equity from his sale was this 20-unit multifamily building in Houston, Texas. Once this property hit the market, literally 2 days, we put an offer on it and took it off market. The reason why we did that was because it was listed at an 8.5% cap rate in a market that trades at a 7%. And so during this transaction, while we were in escrow, there were multiple points during escrow that the seller wanted to back out of the deal. Obviously, they couldn't do that, but it was probably because they listed the property below market. So we took advantage of this opportunity, and we were able to buy it for $1.5 million, and it was located just 15 minutes away from downtown Houston and the Energy Stadium where the Houston Texans play. Great deal. We were very happy with it, but again, taken off the market within 2 days. That's kind of what it takes to get a good deal in this market, or in the previous market, fourth quarter 2019. As we dive further, I'm going to run through the analysis. So in his 20-unit Koreatown property, he was getting about $50,000 in net income from his investment. Now, taking that equity and reinvesting it to an out-of-state portfolio, you'll find that his cash flow significantly increases due to the higher cap rates in out-of-state markets. We built together a portfolio consisting of that same 20-unit Houston multifamily complex, and we added a portfolio of manufactured homes, 15 as a matter of fact, and his blended return went from $50,000 in Koreatown to $135,000 in a blended portfolio diversified in Houston. And again, it consisted of the 20-unit building near the Energy Stadium plus 15 manufactured homes. In the second situation, in the second scenario that we're going to dive into, my client sold a building out here in Alhambra to Italian brothers, and they had this property that they owned for about 30 years. And they realized that they were going to get ready for retirement eventually because of the fact that they were working in the restaurant industry. And as you guys know, the restaurant industry can be at times very volatile. So my clients made the right move early last year before this whole COVID-19 outbreak. They sold their building and they exchanged it into the Pizza Hut that we had mentioned in our previous webinar series. And this Pizza Hut was one of the largest Pizza Hut franchisees in all of America. We got a 20-year absolute triple net lease. We got it at 6% cap rate, and we bought it for about $1.3 million. Now, from that exchange and with the equity from the exchange, we took that single tenant retail building in Alhambra and we reinvested it into that Pizza Hut, in addition to 19 single family homes spread out between Indianapolis and Houston. In the previous situation, the client was making $95,000 per year in net income from their property here in Alhambra. With the new allocation from their exchange, that cash flow significantly increased from $95,000 to $150,000 in net income. Plus, they're diversified by spreading out their risk amongst 20 properties while deferring their capital gains tax by doing the exchange. So this is kind of a lifestyle change here. They go from $95,000 in net income to $150,000 per year in net income. Plus, they're diversified. Here's another situation. My client had bought a luxury penthouse in the heart of downtown LA on Flower Street and 6th. And he bought it at the bottom of the recession for about $700,000. He asked us to help him list the property about 3 years ago. And we were not only able to help him list the property, but we got it sold in less than 2 weeks at about $1 million. Rather than get hit with capital gains tax, he decided to reinvest the whole portfolio, or he decided to reinvest the total equity into a portfolio of single-family homes spread out between Indianapolis and the manufactured homes. And so when he did that, he converted his single property in downtown LA, that luxury penthouse, and it went into 17 single-family homes fully managed and passive in Indianapolis and Houston manufactured homes, in the Houston manufactured homes. And that blended return, he went from $40,000 per year on that penthouse to $115,000 in net income from his portfolio, more than doubling his cash flows by doing the 1031 exchange. So another very happy client in that regard. Here's another property we just closed on a few months ago. Our client had a condo that was walking distance from the beach out in Long Beach. And we were able to help advise her and give her some pointers on preparing to list this property. But case in point, we sold the property for $300,000. She was making less than 4% return on that equity. And by doing a 1031 exchange into the Indianapolis and the manufactured homes, she increased her cash flows from $8,000 per year to $30,000 per year in net income, in net cash flow, and also diversifying herself by spreading the portfolio between two markets, Indianapolis and Houston. And again, it would be a fully passive portfolio at an 11% cap rate return. And then finally, I'm going to give it back to Rusty on a transaction we're in the process of closing.
Great. Thanks, Edward. Yeah, you're looking here at a Popeyes. Now, we have a client who just closed. We were crossing their fingers that the buyer didn't back out, but they didn't. And so they just closed on selling a property on the west side. A developer was buying it to build a big development there. And so our client's deal went through, like I said, just last week. And we had this property all set up. This is a Popeyes, and this would be a comparable tenant to what you saw with In-N-Out Burger. Popeyes is very popular in the Midwest. And it also, you can see it has a drive-through. And so it met our criteria. So this property will probably be closing in the next 2 weeks. Our client is very happy to buy this in this market, very, very happy. And so again, long-term triple net lease. This is also in Houston. It's actually on one of the main boulevards with a ton of retail and stuff all up and down it, right in the main part of Houston. So very good place to be. The cap rate was 5% and a brand new 15-year triple net lease. And they bought this for just over $2 million. Again, you know, the concern about what's happening with the virus and everything, we called up the Popeyes and we did some investigation while we're in escrow now, and they're having no problem. They're actually a 24/7 operation here, literally. And so that drive-through is busy all the time. And just like we talked about with In-N-Out Burger, they're not having any problem with sales at all. So we're not worried about the rent here in any way, shape, or form. Now, what we did in addition to this, because our client that sold the property in the west side got $3.1 million, so we had an additional $900,000 after purchasing this, and we just put under contract a portfolio of these are manufactured homes and also some homes in Indianapolis, single family. And so you're looking at here, I believe, 21 single family homes in addition to the triple net lease Popeyes. Now, our whole thought process in this is the bulk of the money from the 1031 went into what we call an anchor tenant. You know, we're not worried about that triple net lease. It's going to be great for the next 20 years, or in this case, 15 years, despite what's happening with the economy. Now, we can all question what's going to happen with all these single family homes. Now, we're buying these at an average of 11 to 12% cap rate. Now, and we're also paying all cash. So if you compare this to, say, a 20-unit apartment building, if you bought a 20-unit apartment building, would you expect all 20 of your tenants to be always paying their rents? No. There's always going to be some turnover. There's always going to be some tenants that have some issues and you have to get rid of them, whatever it is. So we're not expecting this whole portfolio to be perfect. You know, let's be real about it. There's going to be some tenants in here that have trouble paying their rents. Right now, all of these properties have tenants in them. They're all paying the rents. In Houston particularly, traditionally, there's been a lot of excellent programs, both on the state level and federal level for people that have trouble paying their rent. And so because of that, we're feeling very confident that most of these guys are going to have no problem, you know, April 1st and also May 1st. Just to give you an example of being proactive, the managers of these manufactured home parks have been trained that when a tenant comes in and can't pay their rent, they will sign them up on the spot for one of these programs, and the rent will usually go directly to the park rather than to the tenant. So again, we're being very proactive, and we feel that, okay, so we have to deal with a few tenant issues in our property, but in the end, this portfolio is going to do okay. And again, if you buy something at 11% cap rate and you have to lower your rents, you're still got a pretty good cap rate. So again, our client is gladly doing this. They're actually coming out of a property where they were getting very little rent, to be frank. So their cash flow from this portfolio, and again, it's the Popeyes plus these 21 units we bought, is going to be over $200,000. And again, you know, we're probably going to have a few tenants and issues, and maybe that drops down to $150,000. I don't know. But in the end, we've got a good diversification and a portfolio that we're not too worried about. Okay, so let's talk about retirement accounts. Look, there's a lot of issues with 401ks and IRAs right now for two reasons. One, interest rates have gone down ridiculously low, the lowest we've ever seen in our lifetimes and actually in history. And so if you're trying to put your money into a bond or something like that that gives some kind of interest or cash flow, it's the lowest we've ever seen. So that's a problem. In addition to that, the stock market just lost 40% of its net worth. And so that's not good. So a lot of people are very concerned about having their money in stocks, and they're you know, changing their portfolio around. But in the end, trying to get some kind of positive cash flow today is really, really tough. So we're just showing you here that we can do a lot of these properties inside of an IRA. This was a client last year. They cashed out $250,000 from the stock market, which in retrospect, they're glad they did. They took that $250,000, we split it up between 4 manufactured homes and an Indianapolis property, which totaled the $250,000. They were paid all in cash. His income from that is almost $30,000 a year, more than 10%. Now, again, being real, there might be a few tenants in here we have some problems with, and that cash flow may drop. But it's still a heck of a lot better than he gets anywhere else. Now, the other question that comes up is, well, his $250,000 that he put in those properties, what if those properties go down in value? They may. You're right. They may. Going through what we're going to go through, property values can easily drop. But guess what? As long as we're getting our rent and as long as we hang on to those properties, we are going to come out of this. Maybe it's a year, maybe it's 2 years, maybe it's 4 or 5 years. I don't know. We'll see. But either way, as long as we can collect rent, we're fine. And I know for a fact that in the markets we're in, we can always get tenants. We may have to lower our rent. We may have to make sure that they're, you know, a good tenant because of their job situation, whatever. But in the end, we can always get tenants. It's just a matter of making sure that we have enough money to pay all the expenses, etc. So again, these guys paid all cash. So we lower rents. We're still going to have good positive cash flow. And that's why they bought it, was for the cash flow. And so in the end, our property values will go back up later, and we're really totally fine. So again, if you're interested, if you have a large portfolio of stocks or bonds or whatever, and you want to change it around or whatever, this is an awesome opportunity. A lot of these manufactured homes we're doing are around $40,000 each, and they cash flow between 11 and 12% after expenses, so it's a great alternative to diversify your portfolio. Okay, so that's pretty much all that we were going to show you today. We had some questions that came in from our earlier webinars, so we thought we'd kind of go through a few of the ones that we thought were good. The first one that came up is, how do we find our property management? Because in the end, no matter how good your property is, if you don't have good management, it's a problem, especially when you're doing out of state. And look, I get it. The biggest complaint I've ever heard from people in the rental market is having bad managers. They overcharge for things. They're a problem. They don't follow up like they should. I mean, there's a million complaints we get. We've been very careful about vetting property managers we deal with. For example, there's one group we deal with. It's actually a man I know that was here in California. He moved to the Dallas-Fort Worth market 20 years ago. He's since then built up a very large, very reputable management company, and we've used him for quite a few of the properties we've done in that market. They're great. I highly recommend them. We have other clients that have been with them, and we've had no problems. So a similar story is for Houston, Austin, Texas, Indianapolis. We now have good management that we can deal with in the Tampa Bay area in Florida. But again, we don't want to sell you a property without good management. Now, if you're doing a triple net lease property, it's a little different because there's not a lot of management there. So most people can just do that themselves. But these other types of properties that are residential and have tenants that have turnover and stuff, you got to have a great management company on the ground. And so the markets we're dealing with, we assure you that we have good management before we sell you those kind of properties. But it's But at this point, those markets, we've done a lot of business in and we've been in there for years, so we can vouch for the property management. But you're right, it's something you really have to check out before you bring on a management company. Another question here is, do we still have to pay property taxes with what's going on? That's a good question. Truthfully, we have not heard anything about property taxes. And also remember, every county is different, right? So here in LA, you're going to pay to the county of LA your property taxes. I've not heard of them, saying we don't have to pay our property taxes. Obviously in Texas, each county is going to be different, but across the boards, we haven't heard anything. And remember, these different municipalities are counting on those property taxes to pay the school system and other stuff. So it would surprise me if they just said, hey guys, you don't have to pay your taxes for the next 6 months or something. So we'll see how that plays out. But as of now, we have not heard anything whatsoever about property taxes. How can you do a 1031 exchange into a manufactured home when you don't own the land? So if you didn't realize it, those manufactured homes, you're just buying the building. You're not buying the land. Now, the IRS says that as long as it qualifies for real estate, we're allowed to do it. And there's 2 criteria that makes that property count as real estate. So here in California, if you buy a manufactured home, you're actually not considered real estate. It's considered personal property, and it says that right on the registration when you register it. So in California, we're not able to do a 1031 into a manufactured home. In Texas, we are, and the reason is the state of Texas on their registration for the property or for the building says right on it, is this personal property or is this real estate? And we obviously check off the box saying that it's real estate, which is the first qualification. The second qualification for a 1031 exchange is if it's on a land lease, it has to be at least 30 years. So the land leases we have for the lot that manufactured home is parked on is a 30-year lease with the owner of the land, which is the park that we're dealing with. And it has another option to renew for another 15 years at the end of the 30 years. So we totally meet all the criteria. We've actually done hundreds of these properties now. We've had many different attorneys, et cetera, go through the paperwork ever. And so in Texas, we have no problem qualifying for 1031 exchange. So it's going to be a state-by-state issue whether they qualify or not. I think we had another, oh yeah, here we go. What if the tenant's been cut off by payroll and is unable to afford rent and they refuse and avoid eviction? Okay, so that's a big question mark right now. And again, the tenants we're talking about here are residential. This does not apply to commercial. So here in California, what's happened is the governor's come out and said that for residential, you can't evict anybody while we're going through this. Now, we're not sure how long that no eviction order is going to go along, but he didn't say everybody's getting out of their rents, okay? He did say that you can't evict them. So any rents that they're not paying will accrue and eventually be owed. Now, whether you can collect that will depend on what's the situation. But the truth is, there's enough government programs in place that the vast majority of tenants, residential tenants, should not have a problem paying their rent. They really shouldn't. Now, we might have a little bit of gap right now until some of these programs kick in and they start paying out, because as far as I know, none of them have started paying out yet. But when they do, they should be able to catch up on the rent. So the excuse that they can't pay for it is not necessarily a valid excuse. So be very careful on that, but also encourage them and find out if they've been actually applying for these different benefits, because that will pay their rent. So again, we'll see how this plays out. We're still going kind of early in this whole process, but that's what we think. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here today. Again, this is a calamity none of us expected, and I hope to God that you folks are weathering the storm and staying healthy, etc. But in the end, we got to really keep our eyes on what's going on and be aware of the situation and do the appropriate things. If any of you have a situation, because we're still very active here, believe it or not, we're all working remotely, but the truth is we have a lot of transactions occurring. So despite what's happening, there's still a lot of 1031s coming through. We just closed a bunch of properties last week. We have a bunch more closing this coming week and the week after. And so we actually have a very strong pipeline. So there is a lot of activity. And again, we have a very good inventory and access to the kind of properties that we just showed you. So if you are in a 1031 exchange, call us up. We can actually do some spreadsheets. The guys in the office here love doing spreadsheets. We are spreadsheet maniacs. So if you, again, if you give us the numbers on the property you're selling, We can build a portfolio for you and show you with what inventory we have now, and you'll get a very real picture of what to expect if you did an exchange with us. Also, if you just want to invest, again, we have a lot of people. We just did an IRA rollover just in this past week that they wanted to get. Luckily, they took the money out of the market just when it started going down, and now they're doing some manufactured homes with us. So there's a lot of things going on here despite what's happening, and I think it's going to continue that way. At least I'm crossing my fingers. So if you guys are interested in anything we're doing, give us a call. We'll do a free consultation. We can do it by FaceTime or Zoom or one of these other services we're now available that we're using all the time and have gotten very good at. And again, we can email and talk on the phone, etc. So it's not been a problem dealing at a distance. So thank you all for listening. I hope you got something worthwhile out of this. And everybody keep your distance and stay safe. Thank you very much.